Thank you for inviting me, and I will be talking shortly but intensely about how we work with planetary co-design here in Aarhus Public Libraries. You might be wondering what it is you're looking at right now and how does this have anything to do with library. So by the end of this talk, I hope that it might make some sense to you how this GUI stuff can be connected to doing library. I'm Helene Schwartzman. I work in Aarhus Public Libraries as a library transformer. I studied philosophy and design, so it's not so obvious that I would work with nature in libraries. But I also have around 15 years of experience with design thinking in libraries. So I'm privileged to work at Dock 1, the main library in Aarhus, but also in the 17 branch libraries in Aarhus municipality, where I work with transforming library services, spaces, and roles. And most of it is done through co-design, design thinking, and now also with planetary design. So just shortly, why design? Why the design approach? Because normally when you talk about that, people would think about furniture, interior decoration, graphic design. So in Aarhus Public Libraries, our take on design is the open concept of design. That design is really a process that helps you work creatively and visually with changing existing situations into preferred futures. By going through this process that I'm sure you know, where you explore a problem, you involve people, you get inspired, and then you develop ideas, prototypes, and then you test them and iterate. So this is the design thinking process, very shortly stated and illustrated. And I'm sure most of you know that this is what it looks like when you try to work with this mindset of design. So it's very not linear. You can't be sure that you will follow a straight process. So it's much more about a mindset of experimenting openly and prototyping and involving users. And those users, when you work with design thinking in a planetary perspective, are no longer just human. They can be more than human. I'll get back to that. This is the process we're working with in Aarhus Public Libraries now, that we created the toolkit for design thinking in libraries a while ago. And now we're moving towards designing for the new world, which means leaving the human-centered perspective, not always putting human beings at the center of attention, trying to make the world more comfortable or easy. Or it's not all about us anymore. It's about understanding that we are part of a living, breathing ecosystem that we have been actually destroying by having an Anthropocene focus for so many years. So we're trying to practice how can we move into a planetary design approach. We're also doing that because we have recognized that the climate and biodiversity crisis, even though we think, oh, it's about fossil fuels, it's about technologies, it's about science, but really it is about changing our values. It's about having these very difficult conversations about habits and values. And in that sense, it is a cultural process that we need to embark, and we as libraries can play a huge part in that. So recognizing that responsibility, it still doesn't mean that it's simple to work with sustainability. Sustainability is what you could call a wicked problem. It consists of so many different elements. There could be so many relevant actors and so many different solutions. So when you work with wicked problems, you need to get all your design approaches in order. So it's both the products, it's the interactions, it's the systems that you need to look at in a planetary perspective. You can ask questions afterwards. It might be a bit sort of intense. But when you want to find this diversity of solutions, you need to involve lots of actors, and some of those are human, some of them are collective, and some of them are more than human, some are other species, which is why it's necessary to work with a participatory approach. Also, when you work with planetary design, you consider it just like the model I showed you before. It goes from poetry to plumbing, which means all the practical elements that you work with, could be furniture, could be the stuff you buy for your library, everything, every practical decision, you have to look at it in a planetary perspective. So it spans from the very practical, could be plumbing issues, to how do we involve arts, poetry, literature, and how do we connect that? It's about zooming in on the very concrete to approach the very abstract, zooming out perspectives. It is situated so it's connected to the place you work. It's ecosystemic, which means working with whoever is inhabiting that place. It's connecting you to nature, and it's working both with an active approach and also with how are we actually being in the world. Planetary design also introduces something called systems acupuncture, which is like small disturbances that will induce energy into a system in new ways. And then also it's working with a circular and regenerative perspective. So I will give you some examples, because we have worked this way, or started trying to work this way, since 2013. We were doing a design thinking project in a branch library, and we were trying to get community involvement. So we went out to ask young people, what's important in your life? And this was in 2013. And almost all the youngsters that we talked to already then said, we're concerned about the climate crisis. We're concerned about our future, but we cannot listen to any more lectures. We don't want to look at any more scary graphics. We want to get our hands dirty and try to work with sustainability. How do we practice it? So what we did then, it's a long time ago, it's more than 10 years ago, we looked around in our library and we were like, how do we do this? How are we supposed to be supporting that? And then we looked out the window and we discovered we actually have a whole garden that we pay someone to keep it nice and tidy. But what if we start lending out land to let people practice growing things, to let people do composting together? So that was our first approach on working with sustainability, nature connectedness, and a circular perspective in the compost library and the garden library in the branches. What we also discovered there is that library can be more than just a place or a situation. It can be a verb. And we discovered that we find it to be the act of enabling, sharing, and distributing possibilities for meaningful participation. And we did that by twisting these. We sort of imagined we have these three buttons that we can turn. We can work with the space and the place. We can work with the relations, and then we can introduce new tools. So traditionally, maybe the tools were books, literature. The relations was the librarian and the patron, and the space was a classical library. So we started experimenting with this approach as to how do we do library if we have to do it outside. So in 2019, we had a project called The Future Library in a branch library as well. And we started out interviewing lots of locals, trying to discover what are their needs in this local area. And they had a great longing for a sense of community. And a lot of them moved to the suburb because they wanted to be closer to nature. But as they said, they found themselves living in a parking lot. So they were longing for nature and they were longing for a sense of community. So we decided to do something radical and take the library outside. So we would only experiment with library situations outside. We asked also the citizens in this suburb to help us map what are the needs, but also what are the local possibilities. Where can we do library? So we started doing library walks to map the local area, to find out where's the forest, where do we have green spaces, where's the bog, where can we find the birds? And then we started creating a local archive, sometimes in daytime, sometimes at night, taking the kids to the forest at night. And we started experimenting with co-hosting. So the woman you can see there pointing on the tree is a local host who knows a lot about the local trees. So she's taking kindergartens out and doing library in the forest. It also helped us figuring out how can we only use shareable regenerative resources. So we would ask the community to collect whatever we needed, like the lights for the forest at night and stuff. So we were prototyping in lots of different settings, mapping, and we discovered that this brought new people to the library as well. So this created a new sort of diversity, both in spaces and in participants, but also in topics. So all of a sudden, people will come to us and say, I know a lot about birds. Can I make a walk? Could I be your bird archive person? And then people would gather around for different types of topics related to their local area and to nature. They would do skill sharing and all of a sudden discover that fungi actually is very attractive to young people. And these were just edible fungi. They were not, there was nothing dodgy about the fungi. Let me say that. So that was one example of trying to explore and map a local area and create situated library and nature connectedness. In 2019, we started building the SDG lab here at Dock 1, where we also co-designed with the habitants. We were giving a space at the back of Dock 1, the back of the library, and the outdoor area. And we grouped up with a group of unhoused people or homeless people who hung out there, and they helped us design an outdoor library for this space. We also involve colleagues and partners in how can we work with the SDGs or the Sustainable Development Goals. And a lot of our colleagues and citizens said that they felt hopeless or scared, or they didn't know how to approach it because it was complicated. So we decided that we will work with humor, we will work with hope, creating a courage to act. And we created a set of dogmas that inspire all of our colleagues to work with nature and season-based. We created a small seed fund from the discarded books that we sell twice a year. And that is actually worked as what you could call systemic acupuncture, or because it induces energy in the branch libraries to help them work with the SDGs or with sustainabilities because they get micro funding. We also introduced the Wheel of the Seasons, where all of our colleagues work with the seasons and with nature at the center. And we try to create little workshops in a box that can be reused and recycled through the library system so that our colleagues will have the courage to act. And then we created the SDG lab, which is with the homeless people, an outdoor library with a stage, a place for meeting up and having democratic conversations, and a creative space for creating workshops around sustainability that everyone can borrow, which means we now have a place where we can do circular seasonal workshops. I'm going to do the last part very fast. Sorry, I'm almost out of time. We have a seed library, a textile workshop. We put the books in a blender and create new paper. We meet up to do croquis around giant snails. So it could be all kinds of things that can connect people to nature. And that helped us get funding for my final thing I will say, which is the project Eat, Grow, Create. That is about how might libraries become green generators for green transition by providing the space and the tools and the relation for green transition. And I've written nationally because we have 10 other libraries joining us, but also globally because we are actually in a network with Nate in New York and some people in Korea as well. So I hope this connects with what Nate is going to say afterwards. And that's where we turn back to our seaweed incubator and the SCOBY for making kombucha and the mycelium for growing your own fungi, because we try to experiment with radical co-creation with other species. So it could be fungi, it could be bacteria, it could be all kinds of microorganisms that help actually human beings live more sustainably. So with the seaweed, we're trying to grow it, we're trying to preserve it, we're creating workshops around tasting and using it because it is a food of the future. We're creating workshops around grains so people can meet the diversity of species, they can grind it, they can learn how to ferment it, and they can share skills. And actually, that is sort of a culture inheritance. We create workshops around fungi, growing your own mushrooms. If you don't live next to a forest, you can actually grow them in your apartment. So giving people the tools and the relations to try and create the protein of the future. We're also prototyping how can we bring people close to nature by doing guided sensory experiences. So smelling nature, tasting nature, sometimes even blindfolded. We're working with something we call the Leftover Library in collaboration with local supermarkets, where we pick up their leftover green and we set it up as a library service. People come and pick it up, and it creates amazing amounts of conversations around leftover foods. How can you use it? Learning opportunities for creating fermentation. And the same Leftover Library also provides stuff for our plant coloring sessions. So dried avocado skin, onion, whatever. I can see you laughing, Lisbeth and Astrid, because I'm over time now. I have 3 slides left, sorry. We're in the middle of the city, so we're trying to create opportunities for growing things, both inside and outside the library. We have a farm bot, and we're practicing with this because it's difficult. So we experiment openly, we prototype inside the library, and we try to learn collectively. And we can already see now that it takes a lot of time, it's very messy, and there's all of a sudden lots of disgusting stuff in the library as well. We try to tell the stories around it on Instagram to involve other libraries, but also users. And you can join us as well and look into how we do it. So in a macro perspective, if you're zooming out, you can say we're trying to set the table for future communities. And if we zoom in, we're trying to quietly create new connections between people and to nature. So we're learning from nature, in nature, to zoom in, to zoom out.